The dust rose thick and slow over Red Willow County the morning. They forced Caleb Boone to stand in front of the small whitewashed church, his boots heavy with mud, his jaw clenched like a man walking to the gallows instead of a wedding. Caleb was a rancher carved by wind and work, broad-shouldered, quiet, and known across the plains for his honesty more than his words. Yet today every eye burned into him with judgment and satisfaction, as if the county itself had finally bent him to its will. He had never asked for this marriage, never even spoken more than a handful of sentences to the woman waiting inside. But the whispers, the pressure, and the cruel logic of frontier society had cornered him like a wounded animal. Abigail Hart stood alone near the altar, dressed in a modest gray gown sewn by her own hands, her dark hair pinned neatly back, her face calm in a way that unsettled those who expected tears or shame. They called her the Old Maid, though she was barely past 30, a dangerous age for an unmarried woman in a land where wives were traded like necessities, and loneliness was treated as failure. She had buried both parents, run the failing Hart homestead alone, and learned early that survival required silence. Yet no one in Red Willow ever asked what kind of strength that took. The county elders had decided this union under the excuse of doing what's right. Caleb needed a wife to settle a land dispute. Abigail needed protection from foreclosure, and the town needed a story that proved order still ruled the wild edges of their world. As Caleb stepped inside the church, the wooden pews creaked under the weight of watching bodies, and the air smelled of dust, sweat, and restrained cruelty. He did not look at Abigail at first, his eyes fixed on the preacher, while his mind replayed the threats whispered to him over weeks. Marry her or lose grazing rights. Marry her or be buried under legal papers he could never outrun. Abigail, however, looked straight at him, not with hope, not with fear, but with an unreadable steadiness that felt like standing at the edge of deep water. When the vows were spoken, Caleb's voice came out rough, clipped and unwilling, while Abigail's words were clear and calm, spoken like a promise she had already accepted long before this day. The kiss was barely a brush of air, cold and distant, and when the church doors opened again, the county exhaled satisfied, believing the matter finished. But as the newly married couple stepped into the harsh sunlight, something subtle shifted, though no one noticed it yet. The ride to Caleb's ranch was silent except for the creak of leather and the rhythm of hooves, the land stretching wide and unforgiving around them, and Abigail studied it with a gaze that missed nothing: the broken fences, the dry creek beds, the cattle. Too thin for the season, Caleb finally spoke, his voice flat, warning her that this was not a love match that he would give her. Shelter and food, but nothing more, and Abigail simply nodded, replying softly that she understood arrangements very well. At the ranch house, small and weather-beaten, she stepped inside like someone returning rather than arriving, setting her bag down without asking where she belonged. That night, while Caleb slept fitfully in a separate room, Abigail sat at the rough-hewn table, running her fingers over ledgers left carelessly open, her eyes moving fast, calculating, seeing patterns the rancher himself had been too tired or proud to notice. By morning she was already awake, mending a torn saddle strap with skilled hands, feeding the chickens and organizing supplies with quiet authority, and when Caleb watched her from the doorway, irritation mixed with confusion stirred in his chest. The days that followed unsettled him further, as Abigail spoke little but worked constantly, fixing leaks, redirecting water, and negotiating calmly with traders who had long overcharged him, her polite smile masking a spine of iron. Word began to travel, slow at first, that the old maid wasn't behaving as expected. She didn't complain, didn't cling, didn't bow her head, and the county's smug satisfaction started to sour into curiosity. One afternoon, Caleb overheard her speaking to a neighboring rancher, her voice steady as she challenged a boundary line that had been unfairly shifted years ago, citing dates, weather patterns, and old agreements no one remembered her being present for. That night, Caleb confronted her, demanding to know what game she was playing, and Abigail finally met his anger with truth, telling him she had survived too long by watching carefully and preparing quietly, that marriage was just another arrangement, but this time one she intended to use to secure her future. Her words struck deeper than he expected, because beneath them lay something, familiar resilience, born from being underestimated. As weeks passed, the ranch began to change. Fences stood straighter, cattle gained weight, debts shrank, and Caleb felt the ground beneath his assumptions crack. The county, sensing something wrong, began to circle again, not with forced kindness this time, but suspicion, because a woman who refused to break quietly threatened the order they relied on. On a blistering afternoon, the same elders who had arranged the marriage rode out to the ranch, their smiles thin, their questions sharp, probing Abigail's influence, reminding Caleb of his place. Abigail served them coffee, listened politely, and said very little, but her silence was no longer invisible. It was deliberate. When they left, uneasy and unconvinced, Caleb realized for the first time that the woman they had forced upon him was not a burden but a storm gathering patiently, and the county that thought it had controlled 2 lives, with one cruel decision, had no idea what it had just set in motion. As the sun dipped low, painting the land in blood-orange light, Abigail stood on the porch, her gaze fixed on the horizon, and in that quiet moment, something unspoken settled between her and Caleb. Not love, not yet, but recognition. Whatever Red Willow County expected from this marriage, it was already wrong. And what Abigail Hart would do next would not only shake the Boone Ranch, but the very foundations of the world that had tried to cage her. By the time autumn crept into Red Willow County, the land itself seemed to sense that the balance of power was shifting, because where dust once ruled, water now ran clearer through the Boone Ranch. Fences stood firm against wandering herds, and traders spoke Caleb Boone's name with a new, cautious respect. Yet it was Abigail Boone, still called Hart by some who refused to accept her place, who quietly pulled the unseen strings, moving with a precision that unsettled everyone who crossed her path. The county elders did not like what they could not control, and soon whispers sharpened into accusations, rumors of manipulation, theft, and even darker intentions, all aimed at the woman they once believed harmless. When a neighboring rancher was found dead near a disputed boundary, a bullet lodged clean through his chest, suspicion bloomed like wildfire, and Abigail's name surfaced with alarming ease. Carried by those who feared her influence more than they ever admitted, Caleb, dragged into the storm, was forced to choose between the county's judgment and the woman he barely understood but had begun to respect deeply. And when the sheriff rode in with questions sharp as knives, Abigail did not flinch. She presented records, maps, and agreements signed decades earlier, proving the dead man had been stealing water and land for years. Yet logic mattered little in a county hungry for control. As tensions boiled, a mob formed under the excuse of justice, riding toward the Boone Ranch with ropes and rifles. Convinced they were restoring order, Caleb stood in their path, gun lowered but resolve unshaken, finally finding his voice as he declared that no one would take his wife without spilling blood. And in that moment, Abigail stepped beside him, calm as ever, revealing her final move. She had written letters weeks earlier to state officials, land commissioners, and a circuit judge traveling west, enclosing evidence of corruption, bribery, and illegal land seizures carried out by Red Willow's most respected men. And as if summoned by fate, lawmen arrived with warrants just as the mob reached the gate. Chaos erupted, not in gunfire, but in exposure, as pillars of the community were shackled under the same laws they once twisted to their advantage. The truth spread faster than lies ever had, and the county's power structure collapsed in a single brutal afternoon. In the aftermath, Abigail did not celebrate. She simply went back to work, restoring what had been broken, while Caleb watched with a mix of awe and humility, realizing the marriage forced upon him had given him something rare, a partner forged by hardship, not fantasy. Months later, Red Willow spoke of her differently, not as an old maid or a threat, but as a woman who reshaped the land without ever raising her voice. On a quiet evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Caleb finally thanked her, not just for saving the ranch, but for showing him strength he had never learned to recognize. And Abigail, for the first time, allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The county had tried to cage her, and instead she had rewritten its rules, leaving behind a legacy that would be spoken of long after dust reclaimed their footprints. If you want more powerful Wild West stories where fate, courage, and hidden strength collide, don't forget to subscribe.